The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz. And when we are talking amongst Chasidei Chabad about the month of Tammuz, naturally what's outstanding in the month, it's the fact that on the 12 days in the month of Tammuz we celebrate the day that the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from his imprisonment in Russia some over 50 years ago. And this is the meaning of the month of Tammuz to us. And the Rebbe went on, though that today we are only benching this Shabbos, like is only before Rosh Chodesh. In other words, this week we're going to have Rosh Chodesh. But as it is explained in Chassidus, Chassidus stresses how accurate everything is in Lashon HaKodesh, even the name Rosh Chodesh as well. Actually, it should have been called Tchilas HaChodesh. This is the day that it is the beginning of the month. The same question Chassidus applies not only B'negei Rosh Chodesh, but B'negei Rosh Hashanah as well. First day of the year, why do we call it Rosh Hashanah? Let us refer to it as Tchilas Hashanah. This is the beginning of the year, as well as the beginning of the month. And Chassidus explains, way from the Alter Rebbe on, that how accurate everything is, that just like in the body of a person, the person is totally directed by his Rosh, and all the Eiverim, everything is Nichlal, is included in the Rosh. The very same when we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, as well as when we're talking about Rosh Chodesh, the advantage is that on this day of Rosh Chodesh, it includes the entire month already. So Memela, this Shabbos, we are benching the month of Tammuz. And as we say in the text of Birchas HaChodesh, we list all the inyanim which we want the Rebishter should give us the bracha in. As we say in davening, L'chaim u'l'shalom, l'sasin u'l'simcha, l'yishu u'l'nachama, all these brachas apply for the entire month. We want the Rebishter should give us this bracha for the entire incoming month which we're about to go into. But being that this week is Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh is going to fall out on Monday and Tuesday, and as the Rebbe stressed, Tuesday is always a day, the Rebbe keeps on stressing, it's a day, Yom Shehukfal Bo Ki Tov. Tov is mentioned twice in the creation of Tuesday, so it's a day of special significance. So this day of Rosh Chodesh, Monday and Tuesday this week, which is Rosh Chodesh, these days already include Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, which is the days of celebration for the Frierdiker Rebbe's release of prison. And the lesson we can actually derive, the Rebbe went on, from the whole inyan of Yud Beis Tammuz is that just like the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was in such serious situation, and they threatened him with the worst. As we know, the details of the story goes that initially when they arrested the Rebbe, what they wanted to do was chas v'chalila to kill him. Later they released this verdict, and rather than killing him, they wanted that the Rebbe should spend a period of 10 years in Siberia. Later it went from 10 years instead of 10, they lifted it from 10 years to 3 years. But they wanted to penalize the Rebbe very strong, all for one reason, for the fact that the Rebbe was strengthening and spreading Torah and Yiddishkeit in those days in Russia when it was forbidden. So we see from the Frierdiker Rebbe that as soon as he was released from prison, not only did he not hold himself back from his activities, but on the contrary, he went on with a yet stronger force. As he did prior to being imprisoned, he went on with a stronger force as far as spreading Torah and Yiddishkeit. And as we see, as soon as the Frierdiker Rebbe came out from Russia, from prison, how did he himself celebrate this inyan? Also by congregating all the Chassidim and saying Amayim Chassidus in front of them, which is also a way of spreading Torah and spreading Chassidus. So the lesson we are to derive from this is, just like the Frierdiker Rebbe, that not consider spreading Yiddishkeit within any kind of limitations, but on the contrary, he went out of all kinds of limitations, went out of all kinds of medidas v'hagbalas, all kinds of boundaries and limitations. This fact that we are entering this month now, when the day of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz is being celebrated, it's a reminder to us as well that we have to dedicate ourselves to the spreading and observing of Torah and Yiddishkeit also in such a sense of going out of all kinds of limitations, going out of all kinds of boundaries. However, we have to keep in mind, the Rebbe says, when we are told and required to fulfill inyanim without any kind of limitation, and without any kind of boundaries, but at the same time, we are supposed to fulfill all these inyanim perfectly and accordingly. In other words, one cannot say, if we are told to go out of limitations and boundaries, well, we are going to go out of the boundaries as far as the halachic requirements as well. Taking, for example, an inyan which is discussed in this week's Sedra, the mitzvah of tzitzis. We are commanded by tzitzis, we're commanded in general in the Torah that we're not allowed to add on and we're not allowed to decrease. So, if one wants to go out of any kind of limitation and any kind of boundaries, at the same time, he's prohibited to put on 5 tzitzis. The requirement of tzitzis still remains that it has to be 4, not 3 and not 5. The Rebbe brought another example from an inyan which is discussed in last week's Sedra. In last week's Sedra we read how the Rebbe instructed Aaron HaKohen to light the menorah. And we find in detail how Aaron acted when he kindled the menorah. And the pasuk tells us, Vayas Kain Aaron, and this is what Aaron did. And Rashi comments, Lahagit shvachei shel Aaron sheloi shina. It comes to tell us the praise on Aaron HaKohen, that Aaron HaKohen followed all the instructions which the Rebbe told him to, and he did not change anything. So apparently the question arises, we're talking about a personality like Aaron HaKohen. Here he's doing something which is one of the greatest things in his life, the first time that he's lighting the menorah. So, even an Ish Pashut, even a simple person, who is far, far from the level of Aaron HaKohen, will by all means follow the instructions which the Rebbe tells him to do. Here, we are told that we're talking about a person whose caliber and Aaron's nature. A person like Aaron HaKohen. And at the same time, we're told you should know that a person like Aaron HaKohen, when he lit the menorah the first time, he followed the instructions exactly how the Rebbe told him. Naturally. I mean, why different? And it's so important that even Rashi we know, as the Rebbe keeps on always stressing, that the idea of Rashi is pshuta shel mikra, that it's told to a child who's learning Chumash that you should know that Aaron followed exactly what the Rebbe did. Sheloi shina, he did not make any change. But as the Rebbe explained, Aaron here was in one of his highest moments of aspirations, one of the highest moments of kavanis, and Aaron was truly enthused that he's doing such a great thing which the Rebbe told him to do. So naturally, if he was told to light 7 licht in the menorah, by all means Aaron would not go and decrease and light 6. But Aaron, out of great enthusiasm and out of great kavanah and being so involved, perhaps he would have thought that if the Rebbe told him to light 7 licht to the menorah, perhaps 8 would be an additional amount of kedusha. Why shouldn't he try and do 8? So this is what the pasuk tells us. Lahagit shvachei shel Aaron comes to tell us the praise on Aaron sheloi shina. Aaron did not change. He did not do anything on his own. All mitzvahs have to be fulfilled in Gashmias. The Rebbe goes on. In other words, and all Gashmias, the mitzvahs have halachic limitations. How simply are I supposed to fulfill this mitzvah? So this is what the pasuk tells us, that even Aaron, at such great moments of kavanah, such great moments of enthusiasm, and he was in such high spirits at the time, still he followed all the halachic requirements, all the medidas v'hagbalas, exactly how it is supposed to be fulfilled, as the Rebbe, not mentioned today, but at other occasions, when the Rebbe explains this, the Rebbe said that another person being in such high levels, at the time he's pouring in the oil, he would probably spill over a bit, he would trip, he would be so highly involved in this inyan that it may come to some, that he wouldn't fulfill all the halachic requirements, not chas v'shalom because Aaron didn't want to follow the halacha, because Aaron was so involved and in depth and excited about this great mitzvah that he's mekayim, that he would overspill a little bit of oil, it would go a little bit more, a little bit less. He wouldn't, naturally it wouldn't be intentionally, but would all come as a result of him being so highly involved in the mitzvah. So this is what the pasuk tells us. This is the lesson that we have to take as well. That on one hand we are told that we have to be dedicated to the observance and spreading of Torah and Yiddishkeit fully without any kinds of limitations, and there shouldn't be nothing stopping us from doing it, as we take the lesson from the Frierdiker Rebbe's attitude in Russia. But at the same time we are told that when we are fulfilling mitzvahs, we are to know that each and every mitzvah has its halachic requirements, and we have to fulfill the mitzvahs accordingly to all the limitations and boundaries which the halacha has put on each and every mitzvah. Then the Rebbe went on, the Rebbe concluded that in the text of Birchas HaChodesh we conclude v'noimar amen. After we bless the new month with all these details which we list in the Birchas HaChodesh, we conclude v'noimar Amen. We shall all recite Amen, and this is said even on Shabbos, on today. And the Rebbe stressed, the Gemara tells us, Godel ha'ina Amen yoser min ha'mevarich, that the greatness of answering Amen is very important. So great that it's greater, the one that answers Amen is greater yet than the one that makes the bracha. So from here we see, what's the pshat v'noimar Amen? Amen meaning that all these inyanim, here on Shabbos we stress, that all the inyanim which we are blessing for the incoming month should come down into a reality. And that is why we recite and we conclude the Birchas HaChodesh with an expression of v'noimar Amen. Rebbe went on, b'negei the names of the months. We know each and every month has its Hebrew name. In general we are told that Shmois HaChadoshim Olu Imohem MiBavel. When did the Yidden get the names for all these various months? When the Yidden came back from Bavel, that is when the names were adopted. Tishrei, Cheshvan, and Kislev, and so forth. And that's why we find in Tanakh, when Tanakh wants to refer to the month of Tammuz, we refer to Tammuz as the Chodesh HaRavi, it is the fourth month. Counting from Nisan, we know Sivan is the third month. The Rebbe stressed very strongly the importance of Sivan, the month of Matan Torah. And this month is referred to as Yachat Lisoi. Then we come to the fourth month, which is the month of Tammuz. In fact, in Tammuz we have the fast day of Shivasa B'Tammuz. Shivasa B'Tammuz, this day of fast is referred to in Navi as Tzom HaRavi, the fourth fast. Why the fourth fast? Because it's a fast day which takes place in the fourth month, in the month of Tammuz. However, we still find the word Tammuz, we find it mentioned in Tanakh. And it's mentioned in the Navi of Yecheskel, and there it is mentioned as the name of an Avodah Zarah. That there was an Avodah Zarah by the name of Tammuz. Let us explain what's the pshat. There was an Avodah Zarah by the name of Tammuz. In general, it is stressed in Hasidus the importance of the summer months, particularly the month of Tammuz, that it is a month when the sun is seen in its strongest. Now how do we interpret this? The whole idea of Shemesh U'Magen Hashem Elokim. This comes as a reminder to show us the greatness of Hashem, the greatness of the Rebbeinu. However, the people in that generation did not look at it that way. They looked at the sun as an Indian in itself, not that the sun represents the Eibishter and it's something which was created by Hashem. And that's why, as we refer to it by the pasuk, Shemesh U'Magen Hashem Elokim, but on the contrary, they looked at the sun as an Indian in itself. Memela as an Indian in itself, that is why it aroused by them a feeling of worshipping the sun. And that's the idea of the Avodah Zarah of the month of Tammuz. It was the fact that in the month of Tammuz the sun is in its strongest, it's a hot month, and therefore people in those days were worshipping the sun. However, nowadays we take out the Indian on the contrary. We take out of this how this is another step in servicing the Eibishter. Being that this is a month with a Chama B'Tkufasa, where the sun is in its strongest, and that is why we refer to this month, how this comes as a reflection of the Eibishter. How this shows us in another area how we see the strength of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is why this brings about the idea of Shemesh U'Magen Hashem Elokim. We see the sun as a reflection of the Eibishter, as a message as something which was created by Hashem, and that is why this arouses within us another closeness to the Eibishter, not Chas v'Shalom the opposite, but a closeness. Here the Rebbe stressed how the month of Tammuz comes as a continuation to the month of Siv. Siv has all the great inyanim, that's the third month, and it has all the great inyanim of the month of three. The Torah is given in three parts. Torah, Nevi'im, Iksuvim, it was given to a nation that composed of three groups, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. All these inyanim which involve the mile of Shlishi, which involve the mile of Tlisai. However, when was the time when the Luchos came down into this world? When did Moshe Rabbeinu come down with the Luchos in Olam Hazeh? The Luchos was Michtav Elokim, it was the writing of the Eibishter. In other words, when did we get Torah Begashmius in this world? This happened in the month of Tammuz. Because it was 40 days after Matan Torah. Because Moshe Rabbeinu went up Aplahar went up to Hashem for 40 days. And when did he come back? With the Luchos, this was either on the 16th or on the 17th day of Sivan. So this is how the month of Tammuz comes as a completion for the month of Sivan. There are 2 days. Yes. 16th or 17th day in Tammuz, that is when Moshe Rabbeinu came back with the Luchos onto this world. This has been the month of Tammuz in general. It is also important, the particular dates we are in today. So here the Rebbe refers to a Maaseh which is written in Megillas Tainis. The Rebbe says the same Maaseh is written in Gemara. It's recorded in Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin. But the Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin refers to it that the inyan took place in the month of Nisan. However, in Masechta Tainis, there it is written that the inyan took place in the month of Siv.
Megillas Tainis?
Megillas Tainis. I'm sorry, Megillas Tainis. The Rebbe explained that actually writing the month of Nisan and Sivan, they're both composed of 4 letters. And 2 of the 4 in both of the months are the same letters, the Yud and the Vav. Rather, the Yud and the Langanun. You have a Yud in Nisan, you have a Yud in Sivan. You have a Langanun in Nisan, you have a Langanun in Sivan. So Mamela, this could lead to some sort of an error, how we can make an error in writing between Nisan and Sivan. However, when we are talking as far as Megillas Tainis is written according to the sequence of dates. And this inyan is entered in Megillas Tainis in the days of Siv. So Mamela, we definitely cannot make an error, and this inyan definitely took place in the month of Siv. What is it? Something which took place when the Yidden were in the Bayis Sheni. And the Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, but they already had a shaykhs to Alexander Moikta, to the leadership, being under the leadership of Alexander. An emperor. And the Goyim came with a taina that Eretz Yisrael should belong to them as well as to the Yid. The Bnei Yishmael came, claiming that they are descendants of Avram Avinu, and being that it's said in the Torah that the Rebishter gave Eretz Yisrael to the children of Avram, based on this, the Torah should belong, Eretz Yisrael should belong to them as well. So, Megillas Tainis writes that the questioner came up, who from the Yidden should go ahead and respond to this question which the Goyim asked. So he writes that there was a Yid by the name of Gevia ben Pasisa. That was his name. As the Rebbe explained, Mefarshim tell us that he wasn't someone with a special great personality. And he undertook to go ahead and respond this answer. And he told them, that being that the Torah tells us that Lebnei Apilakshim and Shel Avram, Nosan Avram Matonis, that Avram gave gifts, gave presents to the Bnei Apilakshim, in other words, to his other children, all other children other than Yitzchak. He gave gifts by Yishalchem and he sent them away. By this was the indication that Avram's intention for his full inheritance of all other Inyanim should go to Yitzchak only. Memela Yishmael has no shaykhs to Eretz Yisrael. The shaykhs to Eretz Yisrael is only to Yitzchak and not to any of the other children of Avram. When did this whole dialogue take place? This took place on the 25th of Sivan, which is in these days that we are in today. The 25 days in the month of Sivan, this is when this whole conversation took place. Then the Knainim came and complained, how is it that you have driven us out of Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Yisrael belonged to us. Eretz HaKnani. So this Gevia ben Pasisek again was the person that went ahead and answered and responded to this as well. So he responded that your taina has no ground whatsoever. Why? Because Knan was already cursed. Eved avodim yilecha. And kol ma shekona eved kona rabbi, everything that belongs to a slave is owned to his master. And being that the tribe of Canaan, the people of Canaan, were given this curse that they should be in a position of slaves, so that is why you have no legal ownership of your own on Eretz Yisrael. Then the Mitzrim came And all this took place on the 25th day of Siv. Then the Mitzrim came and tained that when the Yidden left Eretz Yisrael, left Mitzrayim rather, they were told to take various things from us, as the pasuk tells us, V'shol Isha Mishchenta Megar Hasbeisa, Klei Kesef and Klei Zahav. So the Mitzrim claimed, give it back to us. So this Geviyah ben Pesisa again responded, and he told the Mitzrim, let us make a cheshbon, let us make an accounting of how much hard labor our ancestors put into Mitzrayim. And if we will make a total of all the days and weeks, years, months that the Yidden put labor into Mitzrayim, how much do the Mitzrim owe us for that labor? This is by far no way does this come to the value which the Yidden took from the Mitzrayim before the Yidden left Mitzrayim. When Alexander heard all these intelligent answers that Gevir ben Pesisa responded to the Goyim who at that time argued on Eretz Yisrael, so he told them that he's giving them 3 days that they should be able to come and respond to the Yidden. The 3 days, this took place on Chav Hei Siv, so the 3 days is till today, till Chav Ches Siv. And when they were given the 3 days, and naturally nobody came up with any other type of an answer to Gevir. What happened? So Alexander said, if you don't come up with an answer within 3 days, you will have to be all slaves to the Yidden. When they realized the situation they were in, they all ran away, and they left over their homes and their fields. The fields were planted with all good fruits. Their homes were stocked with everything. And as the Megillas Tainis concludes, that year was a year of Shemitah. And it was a year of Shemitah, so Mamela, the Yidden normally didn't have what to eat. They didn't have their own fields. Nothing grew in Yiddish fields. So here it was a fantastic opportunity that the Yidden were able to take over everything which the Goyim left them. And the Rebbe told the story in all the detail. The Rebbe concluded, what do we see, what can we take out from this whole inyan, which has a very strong shaykhs to today's date, to the dates that we are in right now. The shaykhs, the Rebbe says, is very obvious. That when Yidden know how to speak to Goyim, and when Yidden speak to Goyim accordingly and properly, without any kind of feeling weak by themselves, but when Yidden take a proper, strong stand to any type of taina that comes from the Goyim, here we see that ultimately the Yidden succeed, as the case was in this particular inyan by Gevir ben Pesisa, that all their belongings, they ran off and they left everything for the Yidden at the time when the Yidden needed it, because it was a Shnas HaShmita, so they left everything for the Yidden. And all this comes as a result when Yidden know how to act properly to the Goyim. In surrounded areas, obviously. They lived, obviously they were pretty close to Eretz Yisrael. It was pretty close that the Yidden were able to have access to all their belongings, because they ran off, because they didn't have a proper answer on the bright and intelligent response which the Yidden gave them. So Mamela, this, naturally the Rebbe was applying to what's going on these days, Takip, what is going on in Eretz Yisrael, and what the Rebbe drew from this is that when Yidden take a proper stand, and Yidden are not nispol from the Goyim, but on the contrary, we answer to the Goyim fully, and we respond to them fully, then Yidden are matzliach, as the case was in the inyanim which we see that Taka took place in these dates, in the dates between Chav Hei and Chav Ches Siv. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe went on his usual learning Rashi in this week's Seder, as well as explaining Pirkei Avos, and an inyan L'Kut Levi Yitzchak, as well as a few other inyanim which came as ashlomes, as conclusions of previous Farbrengens. In previous Farbrengen, the Rebbe discussed how when the Yidden traveled in the Midbar, the Yidden utilized the wagons which were carrying the Mishkan. And we read in Chumash that there were 6 wagons, and these 6 wagons were carrying all the inyanim which were needed for the Mishkan. So the Rebbe explained in the previous Farbrengen, and stressed it today as well again, from here we can see that every inyan in Gashmias has to be utilized fully. In other words, if the Yidden wanted to not to fill each and every wagon fully, then the Yidden could have used more than 6 wagons. But again, everything in Gashmias has to be utilized to its fullest extent. Memela, the Yidden were able to squeeze everything into 6 wagons. Rabbi says a question was raised to him. Mara tells us, Ein anius b'mokei mashirus. That wherever an approach of wealth is used, we don't come in with an approach of poverty. The Gemara uses this expression usually b'negei the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash, Mishkan. Beis Hamikdash, we find how all the inyanim in the Beis Hamikdash, all the dishes were from silver and gold. Memele, it was an inyan of hachava. It was an inyan of ashirus. So if everything in the Beis Hamikdash was conducted in a mood of wealth, as it should be accordingly to the Beis Hamikdash and to the Mishkan, so if that's the case, why was it that it was so exact and accurate in figuring out that everything should squeeze into 6 agolos and that we shouldn't have to come on to a 7th one? The Rebbe explained that these inyanim have nothing to do one with another. There's an approach of poverty. In other words, there are certain people who lead their lives in a standard of poverty, and there are people who lead their lives in a standard of wealth. If we're talking b'negei the Beis Hamikdash, here applies what the Gemara says, Ein anius b'mokei mashirus, that everything in the Beis Hamikdash had to be led under what standard? Under a standard of wealth, naturally, as it is accordingly and suitable for the Beis Hamikdash. At the same time, however, it does not mean that to leave wasted space in the agolos which were carrying the Klei HaMishkan, this is not any siman of wealth. This does not show that the standards that were set in the Beis Hamikdash were standards of wealth and using expensive dishes and the use of expensive kalim and so forth. This does not show it in any way, because if there is available space in the agola, in the wagon, and this space is not utilized fully, this is no way a sign of poverty, nor is it a sign of wealth. These inyanim have nothing to do one with another. And again, based on the rule that everything which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created has to be utilized fully. So if we're utilizing a wagon, we have to see to it that this wagon is utilized to its fullest capacity. And that is why when the Yidden traveled in the Mishkan, they saw to it that the wagon should be filled fully, so that everything should be able to fit in the 6 wagons which carried all the inyanim of the Mishkan. Rabbi said he was also asked the question, kept on stressing the kroshim of the Mishkan. When he was discussing this inyan, he kept on using the expression, the karshe ha-Mishkan, the boards of the Mishkan. Obviously, the Rebbe says to the question which was asked to him, obviously there was the adonim in the Mishkan as well. How do you say a shvel? The sockets. And if we look through Maisa Mishkan carefully, each keresh, each board, had 2 of these sockets, one on top and one on bottom.
No.
Sorry. Okay. So there were double amount of adonim as opposed to kroshim. Kroshim there were 48. However, adonim there were 96. So why didn't he mention that the agolos were also filled with the adnei HaMishkan as well? Meila amudim, there were not that many. But when we're talking kroshim versus adonim, there were double adonim as kroshim. So this is what the Rebbe explained. The Rebbe says that I'll answer it with 2 simple truths. One, a very simple teretz, that the kroshim were 10 amas high. So in other words, in size, the kroshim were by far bigger than the adonim. So memela, when we're talking about the wagons that carried all the detailed construction of the Mishkan, naturally we will stress the fact that the kroshim fitted in, and the adonim, which were much smaller, they definitely fitted. Another teretz the Rebbe says, which we could say, is the Yidden traveled. As they traveled, the boards were fit, the kroshim were fit into the adonim. They didn't even take the adonim apart from the kroshim. Memela, there is no use to mention the fact that there were adonim in the kroshim, in the agolos, because it's naturally understood, being that the agolos were filled with kroshim. Each and every keresh had the adonim with him. So therefore the Rebbe says there was no need for him to specify. Firstly, the Rebbe says, in learning when we talk, there's no inyan of specifying each and every, it's a klal in Gemara, otu ki ruchle, lezel v'lichshev, are we like merchants that we have to list everything that we are carrying? So Mamela, we are mentioning one general thing, and this has been again the kroshim, been again the boards of the Mishkan. However, furthermore, the Rebbe says, in this particular case, not only because of this reason, but in general, could very well be that the adonim was set into the kroshim rather was set into the adonim, and therefore there was no need to transport the Adonim separately, because the Adonim were all fit into the kosher. And this is how the Yidden kept on traveling while they were in the Mishkan. Benegeya the Rashi in this week's Sedre. Benegeya the Rashi in this week's Sedre, which is Pasha Shelach. It is Kapitel Yud Gimel, Pasik Lamed Gimel. As the Meraglim are describing what they saw in Eretz Yisrael, and they are discouraging the Yidden from entering Eretz Yisrael. Pasik uses the expression Visham Ra'inu es hanefilim. The Meraglim, quotation of the Meraglim. They say that also in Eretz Yisrael we saw the Nephilim, Bnei Anok, Min HaNefilim, again an double expression. In other words, they are describing that in Eretz Yisrael we saw giant people, and we felt as Chagovim, we felt as little ants in comparison to these giants. Nemolim, Rashi uses the expression.
Chagovim, what's mentioned otherwise means grasshoppers. The kosher.
But here Rashi says, V'cheine yinu beinayim, shamaynu oimrim zel hazeh nemolim. And they are such great giant people there, and therefore they called all the Yidden and discouraged them from entering Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi comments on the word Hanefilim. Rashi uses the expression Anokim. What does Nephilim mean? Giants. Mibnei Shamchazoi va'azoil. These giants were descendants of Shamchazoi and Azoil. Shenaflu min hashamayim. These were not human beings. These were people that came down from Shamayim. When we made Doyer Enosh, in the days of the Enosh generation, which if we look back into Chumash Bereshis, this was even prior to the Mabul. Rebbe says this Rashi is full of questions. Fine. Rashi wants a comment. What the Taich Nephilim is. Especially that the Pasuk keeps on stressing, not only were they giants, the people that we saw, but they were children of giants. Rabbi says this, a child who's learning Chumash also understands that there's a tzaddik, and there's a tzaddik ben tzaddik. And the child understands that a tzaddik ben tzaddik is greater than one who's only a tzaddik in his own right. So the same thing, if here the Pasuk wants to tell us how strong these giants were, so the Pasuk doesn't say they were merely giants, but they were Nephilim and Bnei Anok. They were giants and children of giants. Which all comes to stress how great and strong they were. So they wanted to bring out their point to discourage Yidden from entering Eretz Yisrael. However, the Rebbe says, for what need is it for Rashi to get involved in this whole ariches to tell us whose descendants they were? That they were descendants of Shachamzoi and Azoil. Why is this important to us? Furthermore, the Rebbe says, the very first time that this Indian is discussed, that is where in Pashas Bereshis, in its original place where this thing is discussed, there Rashi doesn't even tell us their names. So if in its Ikar Inyan, in the first time where this is discussed, Rashi does not find any need to tell us the names of the giants that were Naflu min hashamayim b'mei enosh, why is it that Rashi has to tell us here who these people were? And it's not only one, Rashi gives two names. One name, Shamchazoi, and another name, Azoy. Also, why is it important for us to know now that they were Naflu min hashamayim? What importance is it that this happened to be made Doyer Enosh? All these details, what relevance does this have to the fact that how the Meraglim wanted to discourage the Yidden from entering Eretz Yisrael? Furthermore, anything or anyone that lived in the generation of Enosh was destroyed by the Mabul. As we know that the Mabul wiped out everybody, wiped out the entire universe. Besides Noach and his family, they held through the Mabul. Otherwise, nobody lived over the Mabul. In fact, we find where the Pasuk uses the expression Vayovei Hapolit regarding Oig Melech HaBashan. So the Gemara tells us that Oig was left over from the Mabul. How did Oig save his life from the Mabul? So in Gemara we find 2 days. One day in Gemara is that there was a board on top of the Mabul, and he grabbed onto that board, on top of the Teva, I'm sorry, and he rescued himself through this board. The Rebbe says to learn this way in Pshutei Shel Mikra is very hard, because the child who learned about the Teva and exactly how the Teva was constructed, how the Rebbe told Noach to construct it, without any mention that there was a board on the outside that people were able to hang on to this board. Also we know that there was such heat aroused from the Mabul that how was a person able, in Pshutei Shel Mikra the child cannot understand, how was one able to survive, even if he did hang on the board on the outside of the Teva, still there was such heat and humidity that it was impossible to survive out of that. Another day the Gemara says that how did Oig survive? That the Mabul was all over the world except on Eretz Yisrael. And Oig ran away to Eretz Yisrael. So if so, the question arises, why didn't other people run to Eretz Yisrael? So we must say that this was some sort of a nest which the Rebbe made, that Oig was able to survive, and others didn't run to Eretz Yisrael. Even if they would run to Eretz Yisrael, they still wouldn't have survived. So in Pshutei Shel Mikra, the Rebbe goes on, it's very hard for the child who's learning Chumash to get involved into such detailed inyanim that there were others besides Noach's family that survived the Mabul. So Mamela again, Rashi stresses that this was b'mei doyer enosh. So the question arises, how were they able to hold out and live through doyer enosh at the time the Mabul took place later? And here we're talking about something which took place many, many generations later. The Rebbe interpreted this Rashi. Here we see how every word in Rashi is extremely accurate. Mibnei sham chazoi va'azoil. The Rebbe says we find the expression azoil, we find it in Gemara. Azoil stems from the word oiz, strength. What does the word sham chazoil mean? Sham chazoi? Sham chazoi means, it's composed of 2 words. Shmama, meaning to be very destroyful, to destroy, is called shemama. Chazoi is to see, to envision. In other words, all this is important to the idea which the Meraglim wanted to explain to the Yidden. When we learned in Chumash Bereishis, it doesn't make much of a difference what were the names of these Anokim Shenaflu Min HaShamayim. We couldn't care less what their names was. However, here Rashi is stressing that they were descendants of 2 separate people, one by the name of Sham Chazoi and another one the name of Azoil. Mr. Rebbe stressed, at certain times we find in the Torah that we cannot know exactly of whom the person is a descendant, maybe a descendant of 1 or 2. So that's when we could find an expression, a descendant of these 2 people. However, Torah knows exactly who everyone is a descendant of. So why does the Torah use the expression Sham Chazoi ve'ezoil? Because they were probably descendants of both of them. However, here it's extremely important, the 2 names. The name Sham Chazoi is composed of Shmama Chazoi, I see them being destroyful, and the name Ozoil stems from the word Oiz, which shows an enormous amount of power and strength. So this is what the Meraglim are stressing. Whom did we meet in Eretz Yisrael? We met giants. But what type of giants? Not stam giants. Giants that are descendants and carry the idea within themselves of Shmama and Oiz. Memela, those that can be so destroyful and so powerful that they are extremely powerful, they can destroy, they can turn things into a Shemama. Where are they from? Shenaflu min hashamayim b'mei doyer enosh. It's very important for Rashi to tell us this. Why? Whom did the Mabul destroy? The Mabul destroyed all the human beings who the Rebbe created as people. All inhabitants on this world were all created by the Mabul. However, some sort of a human being, shenafal min hashamayim, that's a different type of a creature. It's a different type of a human being. It's not a regular type of a person. It's nafal min hashamayim. Memela, being that it's nafal min hashamayim, the taka were not destroyed by the Mabul. So that is why Rashi has to tell us, being that these are descendants that are left over from Meidei Renosh, the question arises, why didn't the Mabul destroy these people? So Rashi adds on another word, Shenaflu min hashamayim. This is not Brios that were created by regular means of creation like the people whom the Mabul destroyed. This was something special and unique. This was an inyan of Naflu min hashamayim. Memela, being that they were Naflu min hashamayim b'Meidei Renosh, they were able to survive the Mabul and held out all these years, and their descendants now are living in Eretz Yisrael, and they are descendants that are defined with the same philosophy of Shmama and Oiz, and they're using all this to discourage the Yidden to enter Eretz Yisrael. And that is what Rashi continues, V'chein hayinu be'einayim, that we were in their eyes also, we, as little ants, we were in no comparison to them. And then Rashi concludes this pirush with the word Anok Shemanikin Chama B'Koy Mosam. So the Rebbe asked, if we look carefully in the Psukim, first the pasuk says V'Shomreinu es Anefilim B'nei Anok. Later state the Verta V'Anehi B'Eineinu Kechagavim. So everything in Rashi is accurate. So if Rashi wants to translate the word Anok, Rashi should have translated the word and learned Pshat in the word Anok before Rashi says this whole ariches on Hanefilim and V'chein hayinu beineim. Because obviously, we know Rashi always is mefarish in Yonim, accordingly as the words are mentioned in the pasuk. However, here Rashi goes out of his usual routine of being mefarish the words as they are in the pasuk and does different. Why? Because Rashi first wants to give us a clear idea what type of giants we're talking about. We're talking about because actually, if we know, the child knows by now, that Moshe Rabbeinu himself was also not a short person. Moshe Rabbeinu was tall 10 feet, 10 amos. And it must be that there were many people in that generation which were also as tall or close to the height of Moshe Rabbeinu. So how is it take that they created a feeling that when they were Nephilim, they were giants, and v'chein hayinu beineim, that we were v'anehi beineinu kechagavim, that we were as little ants, no way any comparison to them. So after Rashi explains all this, that's when Rashi can conclude again and tell us the taich of Anok, giants, Shemani Kechama B'Koy Mosan, because they were taki real, extraordinary Anokim, in no way comparison to the height of the people in those days, and in no way comparison even to the height of Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because Rashi gives us an introduction. Who are we talking about? We're talking about special Nephilim, as the pasuk itself uses the expression, Nephilim, B'nei Anok, and again min Nephilim. And Rashi tells us exactly, we should know what we're talking. These are not even human beings. These are people that were naflu min hashamayim b'meidei renosh. Anok shemani kechama b'koy mosam. The Rebbe also touched another inyan. Gemara tells us, the Rebbe says it's a minig Yisrael, that when a becher is poured with wine, we usually overspill the becher. The Rebbe says this is a custom which is minig Yisrael to do so by Birchas Hamazon, by Kiddush, and by Havdalah, to overspill the becher. What is the origin of this minig? Mara tells us that in order that a house should have a siman bracha within it, wine has to be poured like water in that house. The Mela, based on this minig, it's a minig Yisrael to overspill the kos of yayin, the kos of Kiddush, the kos of Birchas Hamazon, and the kos of Havdalah as well. So the Rebbe asks that we find in the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchas Birchas Hamazon, says not so. Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says that one should be careful not to waste wine when he overspills, when he's spilling a becher for benching. So how does this coincide with what says in Shulchan Aruch and the Minig Yisrael? So the Rebbe explained, simple. I'm explaining as follows. He says, if we were to put the becher on the table without any plate beneath it, and then we were to go and spill wine, fill up the becher, not only will we fill up the becher, but we will overpour, so it will flow all over the table. Not only will it flow all over the table, it will flow all over the floor as well. It will go from the table down to the floor. And this is something which can be referred to as a waste and as a spoilage. And this is what Alter Rebbe is referring to in Shulchan Aruch. However, what the minig Yisrael is, based on what the Gemara tells us, that in order that a house should have a siman bracha, yayin has to be poured like mayim. The answer to this is very simple, just to take a little plate and put the plate beneath the becher. When we pour the kos the extra that does not go into the kais goes into the little plate, so it does not cause any kind of waste by being spread all over the table or by being spread all over the floor, just going into the plate which is holding the little dish, which is holding the becher. This is done as a practice to fulfill the idea that kol bayis, every house where water is poured, where wine is poured like water, this brings about the siman bracha to that particular house. Excuse me? He did not mention the word of reuse it, but at least it's not an obvious waste where you see wine spilling over the floor and over the table. I was thinking, Mishas Mais, he did not mention the fact of reusing it. In many homes it is reused, but the Rebbe did not mention it. When it came to learn a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, the Rebbe said, being that today is the third Perek, he will select a Mishnah that in the Mishnah, in this Perek, Shlishi, there are two Mishnahs that also stress very much the idea of Shlishi. It says that word Shlishi is mentioned in other Mishnahs as well, but there are two Mishnahs that have very strongly a shaykhs to the idea of Shlishi, which is discussed in Perek Shlishi. One, the very first Mishnah. Mishnah begins, Akavya b'malal olayma. Akavya b'malal tells us, Histakel b'shloisha dvarim, look into three things, ve'ein atabali de avera, and you will not come to an avera. And he goes ahead and tells us what these three things are. So Rebbe asked, every word is extremely accurate by Tanoim and Mishnah. For what need is it to Akavya to tell us, look into three things? Akavya could have told us, look into the following inyanim, and you will not come lidei avera. And if we will look into the three inyanim, whoever has time will count and see that there are three things that Akavya is telling us. Then we look down to Mishnah Gimel. We have the Mishnahs in the Siddur. This is the way the Alter Rebbe divided the Mishnahs. And this is Mishnah Gimel, according to the Alter Rebbe. Mishnah begins with the saying of Rab Shimon. Famous Tana Rab Shimon, who is known for his devotion to Torah. Teirasuyim Nasai, his occupation was Torah, the Gemara tells us. He tells us as follows. Shloisha she'achlu al shulchan echad, v'lo yamru alav divrei Torah. If three people ate on one table and there was no Torah said, Mishnah compares it, kilo achlu mezifre meisim. The Rebbe asked the obvious question. Why only three? How about when two people sit at a table? Isn't it advisable that when two people sit at a table that they should also discuss divrei Torah? Or one person sits, let him think divrei Torah. Why is the Mishnah, and this Rab Shimon, who's so much an advocate of learning Torah, says when should Torah be discussed? When people are dining together, when they are sitting in a group of three. Shloisha she'achlu al shulchan echad, then they have to discuss Torah. Rebbe said, back to the first Mishnah, that obviously the pshat would be, the Rebbe says he discussed it once already at a previous occasion, there are two inyanim discussed in this Mishnah. Firstly, Akavi is telling us as follows. Histakil b'shloisha dvarim, if you will look into three things, which I'll tell you in a minute which these three things are, ve'ein atabali de avera. And these three inyanim will hold off from you coming to an avera. And the Rebbe says here we see again how everything is accurate. Mishnah could have used the expression ve'ein ataba la avera, and you don't come to a sin. The Mishnah adds in another word, ve'ein ataba lidei avera. What's the pshat yidei avera? At times there in Yonim, it's not a sin. It's just the hand of the sin. It's a yad of an avera. It's not a be'emes an avera. It may lead to an avera. Rebbe says we find in many places we find in Mishnah the expression yodei satumah doesn't mean something which is befeirish tameh. It's something which may lead to tumah. The same thing here. If we will look in histakel b'shloisha dvarim, this will hold us back not only from sinning, but even from coming lidei avera, to something which has a hand of an avera, something which has some sort of an association, some sort of an ashaychus with avera. Here the Rebbe says this is the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov teaches and explains a lot that there is that inyan, how the yid, shem of the person, the yid, and there is the Reibishter, and there is the kesher, the unity which brings together the person and the Reibishter. So we have three inyanim. We have the Reibishter, we have the person, and we have the idea of them being brought together. And this is the Shloisha Dvarim. Meaning that if a person is mistakel b'Shloisha Dvarim, it's stressed in Chassidus many times that there are various expressions on looking, seeing, looking, riyah. Histaklus is a very strong type of a vision. So when a person uses this type of an approach, and he's mistakel, he really looks deep into these Shloisha Dvarim, the fact how he is a neshama, and the Rebishter, and the association between the neshama and the Rebishter, this in itself will refrain him from having any shaykhs, not only to an avera, but even lidei avera. So in other words, the way the Rebbe is learning Pshat, this introduction of Akavya b'Malalel is something separate as what he's going on to say weiter. There are two inyanim discussed in this Mishnah. One inyan is an introduction, Histakel b'Shloisha Dvarim, ve'inata b'lidei avera, which is something in general. Look into, as the Taich of the Baal Shem Tov, look into these three general things, and this will hold you back from doing averas. Then, Akavi is telling us another inyan. Da ma'ayin basa, v'lo natahoylech, v'lefnimiyah ta'asid l'tnevecheshben. This is already a separate inyan. So the way the Rebbe is learning Pshat, Akavi b'Ma'alal is telling us two separate hayrois. One hayroa is Histakel b'Shloisha Dvarim. Look into the famous Shloisha Dvarim. Ve'inat ha'balidei avera. Not that Akavi b'Ma'alal is counting what he's telling us further. Naturally, this is obvious. This everybody could count. But look into the famous three things. The famous three things is the shaykhs of the Eibishter, the Yid, and the shaykhs between them. And if a person really gives this proper thought, this will bring that Ve'inat ha'balidei avera. The very same taich the Rebbe uses in Mishnah Gimel as well. Reb Shimon Omer, Shloisha she'achlu al shulchan echad. Doesn't necessarily mean three separate people. It means the idea of Shloisha, like we learned Pshat here. It means the idea of Shloisha, the Yid, the Rebishter, and what's bringing them together. And as the Mishnah concludes, Shloisha she'achlu al shulchan echad. These Shloisha are really echad. Why? Because all these Shloisha are really tied in with the Rebishter, who is Yochid and Miyuchad. When a person approaches this idea of Shloisha, then naturally when he congregates when he dines at his table, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, no difference how many people are at the table, naturally they're involved in Divrei Torah. But what's the idea of Shloisha? The idea here of Shloisha is how the Rebishter and the Neshama of the Yid, and what ties together the Rebishter and the Neshama. As far as the Lekutei Levi Yitzchak and the Farbrengen, the Rebbe did not elaborate much, but he referred to a Zohar in this week's Sedre, which the Rebbe's father on Lekutei Levi Yitzchak comments on. And this is a Zohar that expression the Zohar HaKadosh is Zakoi inun Yisrael ma'amin akum de alma, that Yidden are fortunate more than the Goyim, the Kutchebrichu, Yisroi behu, V'iskani behu, V'ispire behu. These are three expressions how the Rebishter is fond of the Yidden, and how the Rebishter gives his fullest attention to the Yidden. All the Rebbe brought out of this here was, so again here we find an expression, three expressions how the Rebishter devotes himself to Yidden. Why three? Because this all has a shaykhs to the whole idea of Matan Torah. Because the whole idea of Matan Torah all revolves around the number of three. As spoken about earlier in previous Farbrengens as well. Matan Torah was given b'yachat lisoi, it was given in the 3rd month. La'amot lisoi, uriyont lisoi. Everything around Torah revolves with the number of three. And that is why when it comes in the Zohar that he wants to use a praise on Yidden, how Yidden are different than Goyim, and actually what differentiates Yidden from Goyim, it is Torah. So the Zohar as well uses three different expressions, which also coincides with the idea of Tlisoy, with the idea of three. And here towards the end of the Farbrengen, again, the Rebbe alerted very much that we are left with 3 days, 3 important days, still for the month of Sivan and going into the month of Tammuz. Chodesh begins on Monday, and we have the Shabbos and Sunday and Monday, which all of these 3 days are still days in the month of Sivan. Monday is Taki Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, but it is still a day in the month of Sivan. The Rebbe urged very, very strong that these 3 days should be utilized properly in the Inyanim of Mivtzoyim and in all Inyanim of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. And all of it should be done just like by Matan Torah. There was a condition to Matan Torah was Achdus, Vayichan Yisrael, Ki Ish Echad, Belev Echad, that Yidden were in total unity, and only then they were able to receive the Torah. The same thing, these days should be utilized, and also in a way of Achdus, of unity between one Yid and another, and we should utilize all these 3 days in the highest level possible as far as Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. The Rebbe concluded, now we are ready to end the Farbrengen, and we're in the time of Raiva the Raivim, which is the time of Shabbos afternoon. And now we're going to daven Mincha, which is an inyan of Tefillah. After Mincha, Pirkei Avos is said, which is an inyan of Torah. And together with it, for as far as an inyan of Gemilas Chasodim, the Rebbe left over his cake and wine from the Farbrengen, which should be distributed after the Farbrengen. And this would be a beginning, that on the day of Shabbos, and in such an appropriate time of Raiva the Raivin, to begin with the 3 inyanim of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. And the Rebbe in fact said that right after the Farbrengen, an asifa and a Farbrengen should be made, how everybody should suggest and come up with ideas how to utilize these 3 days, and the best way to utilize them as far as Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim, that these 3 days should be utilized fully until we enter the month of Tammuz, because this here we still have a chance to chaparain in the month of Sivan, in the month of Yachat Lisoi, the month of Matan Torah.